36 men have tried and 33 have failed. What happened to the 3 men who made it the farthest? Here's the untold truth about the Alcatraz escape. Number 9. Background on Alcatraz. The Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was a maximum security federal prison on Alcatraz Island, around 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco. Given its high security and the island's location in the San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz was believed to be escape-proof and America's strongest prison. Alcatraz was used to hold prisoners who caused trouble at other federal prisons. It housed roughly 1,500 federal inmates, including some of America's most infamous criminals. Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly are some examples. The 3-story cell house had 4 main cell blocks, A block through D block, right in the center. The warden's office and visitation room were on one end of the building. The dining hall and kitchen areas were on the other side, along with the exercise yard. The prison cells typically measured 9 feet by 5 and 7 feet high. Each prisoner had their own cell, but they were primitive and lacked privacy. They were only outfitted with the bare necessities. Prisoners followed a strict daily routine, and their whereabouts were known at all times. To give you an idea of how closely they checked on prisoners, a total of 13 official counts were made every 24 hours. Escape seemed almost impossible. Despite the odds, from 1934 until the prison was closed in 1963, 36 men tried 14 separate escapes. Nearly all were caught or didn't survive the attempt. However, the fate of 3 particular inmates remain a mystery to this day. Number 8. The Escapees. Inmates Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin were the prisoners who attempted the infamous 1962 prison break out of Alcatraz. Frank Lee Morris was orphaned at age 11 and spent most of his childhood in foster homes. He was convicted of his first crime at age 13, and by his late teens, he had been arrested for crimes such as armed robbery. Morris was in the 98th percentile in intelligence. Supposedly, he had an IQ of a 133. Genius level is considered 140 and above. Escaping from Alcatraz actually wasn't his first escape. He escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving time for bank robbery. He was caught again a year later, sent to Alcatraz in 1960. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, were born into a family of 13 children in Georgia. The brothers began robbing banks and other businesses as a team in the early 1950s. They targeted places that were closed to ensure that no one got injured. They claimed that they used a weapon only once during a bank heist with a toy gun. By the 1960s, both received sentences that brought them to Alcatraz. But how did the brothers and Frank Morris come together? They all had served time together at the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta. After repeated failed attempts to escape from the Atlanta facility, the brothers were transferred to Alcatraz. A 4th guy, Alan West, was also involved, although he didn't leave Alcatraz with the trio. West was serving his 2nd term in Alcatraz. He knew John Anglin from prison time together in Florida. The escape plan started to take shape in December of 1961, beginning with a collection of several old saw blades that West allegedly found in one of the utility corridors while cleaning. And that's why he was pulled into the escape. In later interviews, West would take credit for masterminding the whole thing. Number 7. The Plan. While in Alcatraz, inmate Clarence Carnes became friends with Morris and told him about the access tunnel behind their cells. Morris used this information to develop the overall escape plan. They then all carefully planned the escape for 8 months, leaving nothing to coincidence. Over the next 6 months, the men widened the ventilation ducts beneath their sinks using the saw blades discovered by West. They also used metal spoons smuggled in from the dining hall. Amazingly enough, they also made an electric drill improvised from the motor of a vacuum cleaner. They hid the noise of their work with the louder noise of Morris playing his accordion during music hour. That was in addition to all the noise of instruments during music hour. Yep, that's right, Alcatraz had a music hour. This was something new to the prison and a somewhat loosening of the extremely tight rules. Dozens of men simultaneously playing the accordion and other instruments was able to cover up the sound of drilling. Their progress was concealed by whatever they could find to cover the walls in their cells. Behind their cells was a common unguarded utility corridor. They made their way down this corridor and climbed to the roof of their cell block still inside the building, where they set up a secret workshop. This was a hidden place where it was always empty and guards pretty much never went, but they would still take turns keeping watch for guards at night. They used a variety of stolen and donated materials to build and hide what they needed to escape. Number 6. The Raft. The guys spent many weeks constructing an improvised inflatable raft along with life jackets. Swimming was just not an option with the conditions in the water surrounding Alcatraz. The raft and the jackets were made using material from more than 50 prison raincoats. Of course, all the materials were stolen. So how are they able to figure out how to make a raft? The men had access to magazines, and it's believed that information from magazines, such as Popular Mechanics, helped the men with the construction. The rubber raincoats were held together with thread and contact cement. The seams were carefully stitched by hand and sealed by heat coming from steam pipes. They were able to inflate the raft with a concertina, which is pretty much like an accordion, ingeniously rigged to blow air into their raft. The raft came out to be around 6 feet by 14 feet, just enough room to hold all of them. They would typically take turns working on the raft beginning at 5:30 p.m. and stop just before 9 p.m. That was the final lights out count for the night. While they were working on the raft, they were also looking for a good way to get out of the actual building. That's because the ceiling was roughly 30 feet high. But by using a network of pipes, they were able to climb up the walls. They eventually pried open the ventilator at the top of the ventilation shaft. They kept it in place temporarily by fashioning a fake bolt out of soap. Number 5. The escape. The night of June 11, 1962 was when they decided to make their escape. They had finally made everything they needed, and everything was in place. From the service corridor, Morris and the Anglin brothers climbed into the ventilation shaft to the roof. Guards actually did hear a loud crash as they broke out of the ventilation shaft, but since nothing more was heard, they decided not to investigate. Come on, what could possibly be happening? People breaking out of a maximum security prison on an island? They descended 50 feet to the ground by sliding down a kitchen vent pipe and then climbed 2 12-foot barbed wire perimeter fences. They were able to do all of this hauling the life raft and stuff to inflate the raft. They decided to go to the northeast shoreline of Alcatraz, near the island's power plant, to inflate their raft. That spot was a blind spot in the prison's network of searchlights and gun towers. It's estimated that sometime after 10 p.m., they left toward Angel Island 2 miles to the north. But really, authorities really had no way to tell how much of a head start they had. And that was thanks to the crude plaster heads they had made. Up close, the heads obviously didn't look real at all, but from a few feet away, they did the job of looking lifelike over and over again when they were working in their workshop. The heads were ingeniously made out of a mixture of soap, toothpaste, concrete dust, and toilet paper. They were able to make them look somewhat realistic with paint from art supplies from prisoners. The hair they used were from the barbershop floor. For the actual bodies, they would just pile towels and clothes underneath their blankets. This mystery kind of reminds us of the mystery of why Michael Jackson owned so much crazy stuff. Find out more with this video. Number 4. Left Behind. It was supposed to have been the 4 of them all escaping together, but only 3 guys showed up. What happened? Alan West had trouble opening his vent covering in his cell. He had used cement to cover up the crumbling concrete around the vent in his cell, but it had actually hardened too much. The other guys did try to kick open his vent cover, but it didn't work. They had to leave since they had limited time. By the time West managed to make the hole wider to escape, the other guys had already left on the raft. He escaped the building only to return to his cell around sunrise and go to sleep. He decided to tell investigators exactly what they all did, though. He gave them a detailed description of the escape plan. In return, he didn't get punishment for his role in the escape. Number 3. What's the official story? The official story by the FBI is that they believe the men did not survive their escape attempt to Angel Island. The FBI and the Coast Guard combed the area and found several items that they believe belonged to the men. This included a paddle, a couple of life jackets, and a sealed plastic bag that belonged to the Anglin brothers with letters, photos, and addresses. Later, shreds of what's believed to be the raft were found washed up on a beach. Investigators thought that the high tides would have made it impossible for the 3 men to safely get to shore. Their bodies are assumed to have been swept out into the Pacific Ocean. Also, there were reports of a body spotted in the days after. The reports came from a Norwegian shipping freighter that claimed to see a body floating nearby. The body was never recovered, but it was assumed as more proof of the men not making it. Another reason to believe the men had drowned was the information West had given. The men had intended to steal a car and perform a robbery once they reached Angel Island. However, no robberies or stolen cars were reported in the days after their escape were made. The FBI's official line was that the raft broke up and sank at some point after having launched from Alcatraz. They then tried to swim for it, but most likely succumbed to hypothermia and their bodies were quickly swept out to sea. After 17 years of searching for answers, the FBI decided to close the file in 1979. Number 2. What really happened? Well, the only people that really know for sure are the three escapees and whoever they told. Anyone else doesn't know for sure. Despite the official statements, a number of family members have come forward and have insisted that their relatives did survive that night. In 2011, Bud Morris, a man who claimed to be Frank Morris's cousin, came forward and said that he had previously delivered bribes to Alcatraz guards. He also claimed to have met Frank in a San Diego park shortly after the escape. His daughter claimed to have remembered being there as well, meeting with her, quote, father's friend, Frank. In 2012, two of the Anglin sisters, along with two of their nephews, claimed to have received phone calls and Christmas cards from the brothers in December of 1962. Then, in a 2015 History Channel documentary, it was revealed that handwriting on some of the Christmas cards was found to match one of the brothers. One of the more popular theories is that they traveled to Brazil. A friend of the Anglin brothers, Fred Breezy, claimed that he had met with them in Rio de Janeiro in 1975. He had even taken a photograph of them. Forensic experts concluded that the photograph was most likely of the Anglins, but come on, they're wearing sunglasses here. How can someone really be sure? Robert, another Anglin brother, told his family members that he had been in contact with the brothers until around 1987. Finally, a letter was posted to the San Francisco Police Department in 2018 by a person claiming to be John Anglin. It read in part, quote, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." He stated that he would turn himself in return for a minimal prison sentence and treatment for his cancer. The letter was tested for fingerprints, DNA, and handwriting analysis. However, the results were inconclusive. There are two main theories in how they made it off the island. The first is that once they inflated their raft and life jackets, they paddled hard toward Angel Island. This aligns with the assumed physical evidence from the escape. Fellow prisoner Bob Shiblin asserted that he had been providing Clarence Anglin tide tables torn from newspapers thrown in the trash by the guards. This shows that they had at least some knowledge on the tide conditions. The Anglin brothers also grew up on the Tampa Bay, and the family members say the brothers were great swimmers. Supposedly, they understood the currents and general conditions of swimming in open water and the nature of swift ocean currents. Their success was predicated on several factors, but the most important one was the time they had entered the water. Too early, and they would have been swept to the sea. But if they timed it out using the tidal charts and entered the water between 11 p.m. and midnight, they could have survived without much effort. The second main theory suggested that they had planned to make their escape with help from a passenger ferry at a nearby dock. A 120-foot electrical wire was reported missing from that dock. It's been theorized that the men used the rope to attach themselves to the ferry and hitch a ride to the mainland. Then, a boat was waiting for them near the St. Francis Yacht Club and sped them to a distant harbor for safe passage out of San Francisco. After hearing of the escape, Robert Cecchi, a reputable San Francisco police officer, contacted the FBI reporting that he had witnessed a suspicious boat in this very area. He's remained convinced he had witnessed activities linked to the escape. Number 1. What's the most likely truth? Most of the time, the right answer is the simplest answer. For every single piece of evidence or theory that suggests they did not make it is another piece of evidence making a compelling case for survival. There just simply isn't any definitive evidence on either side of the debate to close the case. A lack of evidence doesn't prove they died, nor does it prove they lived. The untold truth is that we'll never, ever know unless one of the men actually shows up today and is confirmed to be one of the escapees. Too much time has passed for any stories remembered to be actually accurate. Watch this next video to learn about the craziest things Michael Jackson owned.